Today I'm going to do a bit of an update on the situation regarding the rear shock chromed crown nuts for the Yamaha Y1. And if you recall, a while back I posted a video looking for some help on trying to source new replacement nuts because these are no longer available from Yamaha and they're a bit rare. The issue really is not the nut itself, but the thread pitch. It's a 12 millimeter by 1.5, which is a little bit unusual. Well, I believe I've come up with a solution here, and let me talk you through it a little bit. Recently, I wandered off to a large big box hardware store in our area, and I took one of these nuts along with me, and I started wandering through their hardware department. They have quite a large hardware department, including chrome fasteners. And I came upon this this item right here, which is a metric, they call it acorn nut. It's a 10 millimeter by 1.5. So the pitch is right, but the diameter is wrong. But when I looked at the nut itself, lo and behold, it looked very, very similar to the one I had in my pocket right here. So I went ahead and bought 4 of these. They had 6 or 8 of them in stock, and I think these cost me around $1.80 US dollars a piece, so they're very inexpensive. And you can see how they compare right there. The only real, besides the thread diameter and pitch, the only real difference is the replacement part from the hardware store is about 2 millimeters taller. I think you can probably just see it right there. It's slightly taller, but it is chrome. And the size across the flats is 17 millimeter on both, so it's the same, essentially the same size fastener. Of course, I have that problem with the threads, the internal threads. But looking at this fastener here, I notice that there's a lot of material on the inside to work with if you compare the two. So long story short, what I decided to do was to drill and tap this for M12 1.5 to match the original nuts. And in fact, I have done 3 of the 4 already right here. So these 3 were the new ones I bought, 3 of the 4 I bought. And you can compare the difference here. This one was drilled and tapped. This one is the original. And you can see it worked out pretty well. Now, the other issue I had is I wasn't sure if I had the right size tap for this when I was in the hardware store. So I came home and pawed through my inventory of tools, and I did in fact have this M12 by 1.5 bottoming tap. It's a flat tap on the bottom. It's not designed for starting threads. It's designed for finishing threads. Quite often in a blind hole, that is a hole that's not a through hole, so it has to go down and stop. But a bottoming tap will not do me any good to cut new threads and starting threads. So, and I've never used this tap before, never had a reason to. It was just mixed in with some of my other taps. What I ended up doing is I bought online 2 inexpensive M12 by 1.5 taps. This came as a set, by the way. Taper tap here on the left and a plug tap here on the right. I paid a little over $8 for these 2 taps together, which is very inexpensive. They're undoubtedly made in Asia. And normally I try to buy good quality tools, but knowing that this would be I think a one-off, probably will never use these taps again, I opted to go the inexpensive route and ordered them online, had them within a couple of days. In fact, these are the taps I used to rework these 3 nuts. If I was to do this in higher volume, I certainly would go out and buy good quality taps. A good quality North American made, US made tap of this type would probably cost $25 or more. So you can see the difference in price, though they undoubtedly would be much better quality and would last longer than these would. But for my purposes to tap 4 nuts, I think they'll suffice, and they work just fine on these first 3. I have tested these on the YL1 and they thread on perfectly. So that's the gist of my solution that I've come up with. What I'm going to do now is go over to the mill and I'll work through a review of the process of drilling and tapping this last nut. If you're not interested in the process of drilling and tapping these nuts, and certainly you can consider this video a wrap at this time. I'm going to draw it to a close of this part of it. We're going to reset up on the mill and work through the process of tapping these out. You will see these 4 nuts obviously show up later when I install the shocks on the Yamaha YL1. Let's go over to the mill and set up, and we'll cut new threads in this last nut. Here's the setup in the mill. I've got 3 strips of thin aluminum here and here to protect the sides of the nut from the vice jaws. And then here on the bottom I have a piece of aluminum that the nut is pushed down against so that I don't mar the head or the crown of the chrome. I used a drill bit that's slightly smaller than the current diameter of this hole to center the nut over the spindle of the mill. That's close enough for my purposes. If I wanted a high degree of accuracy, I probably would have just used an edge finder, but that's really not necessary for this type of operation. So using a drill bit to get that centered worked fine. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill this hole out to prepare for tapping using 3 different drills. I'm going to start with one that's just slightly larger than the current hole. And I'm going to step up 3 times till I end up with the largest drill, in this case, which is 7/16 imperial, which will be the final drill size before I switch over and then begin tapping using the taper tap. This is a 7/16 imperial drill, the final drill size I'm going to use before I begin tapping. This is slightly larger than is recommended for a tap drill size for an M12 thread, but I want to go a little bit, just a fuzz larger to make it a little bit easier to tap this metal. I don't know the composition of this steel. Sometimes they're very hard, sometimes they're soft, and since I'm going to be doing this by hand, and this isn't a critical thread by any means in this application, I'm going to go just slightly oversized to make it easier to tap it. I switched the setup now and I replaced the drill chuck with a 1/2-inch collet to give me more depth here so that I could use this very nice German-made tap handle wrench, and using the tap fouler to allow me to keep downward pressure on this assembly while I'm turning the tap. As I'm tapping down, every quarter turn or so, I will reverse the tap to break the chip. There's a chip that's forming in there. And then if you don't do that, it makes going real hard. And you also, if you're doing this with something smaller than this tap, a small tap, you run the risk of breaking the tap, which you don't want to do. Breaking this tap is probably less a concern than on a very small one, like a number size tap. So every 1/8 quarter turn, I'll back it up, break the chip, clear it out a little bit, and then keep going down. Okay, I think I'm to the bottom with this taper tap. Now what I'm going to do is switch over to the plug tap and clean out the threads, and then I will probably end up using the bottoming tap one last time to clean it up, and we'll be about finished. This is a plug tap. It's got a little less taper than the first tap I used, and it's really used for just cleaning up the threads. There's the nut I just finished drilling and tapping, the one that you just got a chance to see. Altogether with setup, it probably took me maybe 15 minutes to do each of these nuts. And I do have to do the whole setup for each one because I got to break it down and go back to the drill chuck and then move on to the collet. So it's about 15 minutes per nut. So for in an hour's worth of time, I use these readily available, at least for me they're readily available, hardware store nuts, and created a substitute for the original Yamaha nuts that you see here. I think it's a viable solution for now. Eventually, if I send out other parts to be chromed for another project, or maybe even for this project yet, because I still have to chrome the exhaust pipes, I might send the original 4 out, we'll see. But I think these are a very viable solution right now for my purposes. I have a grand total of around $16 US in these 4 nuts, and that includes buying the new set of taps. That's going to be it for this video, folks. Any issues, questions, or thoughts, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.